On today's episode, Dr. Liz sits down with a divorce attorney, Padideh Jafari, and she shares all kinds of marriage tips from her 22 years of experience helping countless couples through the separation and divorce process. From her unique perspective, she talks about common barriers she notices in couples, from illness, in-laws, and toxic positivity to staying silent and trying to keep the peace, to lessons learned about communication from winning sports teams. Padideh Jafari is the founder and CEO of Jafari Law and Mediation Office, with locations in Los Angeles and Orange County. A California bar member since 2003, she specializes in complex family law cases involving high-asset property division and custody litigation. With experience as a judicial extern and DA's office clerk, plus teaching roles at NYU and Southern California Institute of Law, she brings extensive expertise to her practice. She co-hosts the Narcissist Abuse Recovery Channel podcast and frequently appears in media discussing divorce-related topics. We hope you enjoy the show.
Welcome to Stronger Marriage Connection. I'm psychologist Dr. Liz Hale, along with the esteemed professor Dr. Dave Schramm. And together we have dedicated our careers to bringing you the best we have in valid marital research, along with a few tips and tools to help you create the marriage of your dreams. Dave will be joining us next time, but we wanted to welcome you again to Stronger Marriage Connection. You know, we've produced more than 100 shows here on our podcast with all kinds of relationship experts, but seldom have we had guests that specialize in divorce. I'm looking forward to our discussion today, tackling topics that our divorce attorney she frequently sees with divorcing couples. Welcome to the show, attorney Padideh Jafari.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
I do too. I noticed your information online and I thought, oh, I really want to visit with you. So gracious of you. You are a respected litigator with 22 years of experience navigating complex divorce matters out of California, which is so interesting. The only thing I remember about California's divorce, because I worked with a couple from there, even though I'm in Utah, they came up for counseling, is that they had that long waiting period of 6 months. And occasionally you say there's a few couples every year that reconcile during that period of time.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, with that comes patterns of couples and struggles that you've seen. And we'd love to hear your tips on several topics today. So let's just get going. We wrapped up the holidays a few weeks ago, and in your practice, you've seen countless couples struggle with post-holiday financial stress. It's the best of us. In fact, in January, you often see an uptick in divorces. What's the psychology behind holiday overspending, and what patterns do you notice in how couples handle the aftermath?
Yeah, I always have this saying, they say January is divorce month. And I always say couples want to get their gifts. They want to give their children one last,
beautiful Christmas together.
Yes, beautiful Christmas together, like unity. And so sometimes when I said earlier to you, we were talking offline that couples reconcile. They usually reconcile around November. And so by November, they get through, Thanksgiving, then they get through Christmas and the New Year. And then in January, they're like, I get a slew of emails like, I'm ready, or I get like new clients. So I do think that, finances obviously are a huge indicator of whether a couple is going to stay together or not. I mean, it's just the facts, right? So if one spouse is, really a spendthrift and is like, not wanting to spend anything, and then the other is like overspending, or maybe is a shopaholic, or, you're going to have a lot of conflict over money, which is, can lead to divorce, and does oftentimes lead to divorce.
Mm-hmm. I was just so curious. I mean, do couples who are on the verge of divorce, do they also kind of splurge on each other that last Christmas? I mean, do we see that?
I don't see that. I do see sometimes where if one of the spouses doesn't want the divorce, they'll be maybe like overspending, or like I'll get the client and they'll be like, I got so many gifts, more than ever before, because I think my spouse knows I'm sort of on my way out. And this was like the last like ditch effort. And they also, one other thing, Liz, that's really interesting I've seen is lately couples have been taking vacations together to see if they can mend things before they file. So like I'll have clients that we do a lot of pre-divorce strategy with clients where they'll find me online. They'll say, I'm thinking about divorce, but the nail isn't really in the coffin yet. And so they'll say, we have, a trip planned this summer or around the holidays. I want to just have a consultation with you. Sometimes they pay the retainer, sometimes they don't. Go on my trip and kind of just see, is this worth fighting for one last time? And, and they always say like, what do you think about that? And I'm like, it's irrelevant what I think about that. It's all that matters is what you want to do. And I will tell you, 9.5 times out of 10, I don't even know if that's a statistic, they will come back and they'll say, I'm ready to file, even more so now than before the trip.
Mm-hmm. I suppose whatever gets a couple to that the true essence, right? I think people do know what's best for them. I mean, who am I to say what's best for someone else? So if that's what it takes to be clear, then maybe so be it. That last hurrah or holiday. Another barrier you've seen in your law practice is in-law interference. And gosh, that is so tricky. I see it too. Tell us about the importance of creating and maintaining healthy boundaries with in-laws. What's your top advice? Let's say for even newlyweds struggling to establish healthy boundaries without damaging the family relationships.
Yeah, I mean, family dynamics are so vitally important, as you know, because you're a practitioner, right? So especially younger couples, I think older couples, like when they're on their second or third marriage, and I say that because Southern California, has a very high divorce rate. So they need to make sure that they put each other first. And even the children come second, right? And a lot of times people don't agree with that. They're like, well, wait a minute. If I'm getting married and I have a child, I'm like, no, it doesn't work that way. Your spouse, you're supposed to become one flesh. I don't know if, that's sort of a biblical perspective, but whatever religious perspective you have, it will tell you that your spouse comes first. And then it's your child. And so I always say too, make sure that if you do have a child, that they're good and they have a good relationship with your soon-to-be spouse, because that's obviously very important. But as far as in-laws, I would just say, like you said before, boundaries are so critical. And in-laws really do have an impact, right? If they don't have clear boundaries, very powerful impact if they don't have clear boundaries. And sometimes, Liz, it's not that they don't want the marriage to work, obviously, right? They want their child's marriage to work. They just don't know when to stop and when to come and when to call. And so if you just establish the boundaries early, there won't be any resentment. And, I sometimes watch, we have a TikTok, the law firm has a TikTok, and sometimes I watch these things and I see, the woman is pregnant and the mother-in-law rushes in and like hugs her son, and it's like, not okay. That's not okay behavior, because if you think about it, the husband and wife, they're the first family because they chose each other. And then it's any child or children they have. And then it's their, parents and then siblings after that.
Yes, right. Kind of that leave and cleave, right, to each other. I often think about. Sometimes I know couples, even who've been married a while, they continue to speak to their own people, their blood, about their marriage. That is really deadly, it seems, as well, to a marriage.
Yeah, because I think, Liz, what happens is the couple will reconcile again, or they'll do something and they'll like, forgive each other because you have to, right? Like marriage, especially a long-term marriage, there's a lot of forgiveness. There's a lot of like, I think that's what the person said, but and there's a lot of communication that has to happen, but then the parents never forget, right? They're like holding this grudge. And so I think it's best, and I'm not just saying this because of your profession, but I'm always of the opinion, speak to a psychologist, speak to a psychotherapist. If you really have, something like that, if you have an issue and you want to speak to your pastor or your rabbi, speak to someone that's not a close family member, even friends, because, you don't know the intentions sometimes of friends, right? There could be jealousy there. It could be so many things. Like if it's a big enough issue, it's time to see a professional that can help you and give you like clear guidelines of how to resolve the issue. I think parents and family members and friends will just listen. And sometimes their advice is like not good advice.
And they're tired of seeing us hurting, right? So it's just like, be done with it already, right? Just get a divorce.
Right. And we know that divorce, I know this because I've been doing, family law and divorce for 22 years. It's not that simple, right? Even if you don't have a child with someone, it's literally the breaking of a family. And so people say, oh, well, if it doesn't work out, I'll just get divorced. And I'm like, it's not that easy. And so, if you don't have a child, obviously it's a lot easier. But what about that breaking of that, sort of covenant or those vows that you made to someone, right? So,
Indeed, it's so refreshing to have you on. It's refreshing to hear a divorce attorney say, oh gosh, I'm not even advocating for divorce, right? I want couples, if there is any way for them to work it out.
Yes.
They do, because divorce is a very big deal. Yes. It's crushing.
Yes. Well, I have a great marriage myself, so I'd be a hypocrite if I said, I believe in divorce. I don't. And, it's important though to have open communication, to establish boundaries with yourself, with your spouse, and with your, in-laws. And so that's really important because, once you get resentful, that's where there's going to be a break. And that break, sometimes you might not even know that you're being resentful, right? And so we have a thing in our marriage where it's no tit for tat. Like if you do something for me, I don't want to be reminded of it. And I don't want you to keep a tally of all the things you've done for me. And so that's just something that works in our marriage. But I see that with my clients where there's a lot of, well, I did this and then he didn't do this. And it's like, that's not what a marriage is about. So
a lot of point keeping. The phrase keeping the peace, it just sounds so positive, right? But you argue it could actually damage marriages. Can you walk us through why conflict avoidance often leads to bigger problems? What's the difference between healthy compromise and, let's say, harmful peacekeeping?
Right. So I think there's a new term that I've been hearing lately called toxic positivity. It's like, I don't know if you've heard that term, Liz, but
oh, not yet. Wow.
Yeah. So it's sort of like, that's what it reminds me of is, okay, we're just going to be positive and everything's great. And even though you hurt my feeling, I'm not going to disclose it because I don't want to get you mad, or it's not that big of a deal to me when it's a big deal. Like, for instance, it could be very something small. It could be she loves flowers, for instance, and he doesn't know that. She's not communicating that. And so he doesn't know that. So she's holding on this resentment. Like, my ex used to buy me flowers all the time. Like, why doesn't my husband? And the husband's like, I didn't even know this. Right. And so she's like, well, I don't want to tell him because he should know. And so it's like this toxic positivity. And it's like, but then she goes out and like, my husband's perfect, everything's perfect. But it's not. And she knows it's not, right? And so I think there should be classes for people that want to get married. And the first class should be communicating what your needs are. And the problem is that most people don't even know what their needs are. So it's hard to communicate it. And so to this point of toxic positivity, if you don't disclose what's bothering you, it's going to fester and it's going to get worse in a couple weeks or months. And so, people say all the time, 70% of women, the percentage of who files for divorce first is 70% women. And I've often heard men, because I work with a lot of men groups, they're like, oh, I didn't know. Like, it came out as a surprise. And I'm like, really? Was it a surprise? And so when I sit down with them, if they're my client, and I just, talk to them, I can see, well, she did kind of tell you this. She maybe told you once or twice, but she didn't want to tell you 10 times, right? But then she found it in someone else that was easily doing it. So, and so for her, I think I don't want to communicate this because I don't want to anger him or for whatever it is. And that doesn't work. We know that doesn't work because it ends up being extremely resentful, and that's where the cracks start to happen.
Toxic positivity. Right? Right? Wow, that is something. I'm getting that. I can understand that. In your practice, Padideh, you've seen milestones that are often related to struggles. And we see this in the marital research as well. In your experience, you have a take on the 10-year milestone, the 7-year milestone. What makes these particular timeframes so challenging for couples?
Yeah, there's definitely is a 7-year itch. There's no doubt about it. I've seen it in 22 years. It's right around that 6.5, 7.5 year period where it's just, where it's, I don't know, all the gloves are off at that point. And I really do think couples need to figure out if they're getting married, if it's a contract or is it a covenant? Because if it's a contract, then it's a business relationship, right? I will do this and you will do that. And if you don't do that, then I'm going to dissolve the contract. If it's a covenant, then obviously there's some element of religion that comes in and people do tend to hold on a little bit longer. But I can't tell you exactly why that 7-year itch happens. I think it's different for different couples, but it's exactly what we said today, like lack of communication, lack of, understanding finances. I love Dr. Chapman's book about the 7 love languages. I'm a huge, fan of the love languages. And so, but the issue with the love languages is you have to know what your love language is in order to tell your spouse. And then your spouse has to receive that information, right? So if I say it's, let's say, gifts, and it could be small gifts or it can be large gifts, but it's just the thoughtfulness of buying someone a gift, and my spouse doesn't receive that, over time, this resentment will build. I remember years ago, Liz, in my psychology class when I was at Loyola, so I was in college, not law school, I remember my professor to this day. I mean, that was like, oh my gosh, I'm dating myself, but like 25 years ago, about 25 years ago, I remember my professor saying, once resentment builds in a marriage, you forget about it. Like, it's really, really hard to come out of that. And I remember this 25 years later that he said that. And I remember being like I think I was like maybe 22 or, I was probably actually younger. I was probably in my teens. Maybe I was 18, 19 because I was in college. I remember going, what is resentment? Like, I didn't even know what that word meant, but he stressed it so much in that class that I was like, this is important. This is an important, like, I will make a mental note of this.
Yeah, I can see that. Wow. Back to that toxic positivity. Oh my goodness. But I think that's really fascinating. Let's talk about next the hidden impact of illness on marriages. You have noted that chronic health conditions can create really some unique relationship challenges, even beyond the medical stress? What are the early warning signs that a couple's relationship is struggling under the weight of a health issue? And are there resources they should seek?
Yeah, I mean, there's always resources. It's, people like yourself obviously are great resources. It's, you have to see what the root of the problem is, right? Usually it's not the illness itself. There's some root of a problem. And so the couple maybe is not communicating properly with one another. They're not understanding. Like, I could be speaking right now, Liz, and if you're not understanding what I'm saying, that's going to be a problem, right? And then you're like, well, I thought you said this. No, well, I meant this. Well, what did you? So that communication, right, is broken down. And now you have a very difficult issue, right? You have an illness. You have a financial problem. Maybe somebody loses their job in the marriage. You have all these other things, and these are outside forces that you really, there's nothing you can do about them. And so that's where the break happens. And so I don't believe if a spouse gets ill, that the other spouse is just going to, pack their bags and go. I think that there were other issues and causes, and this is just one more layer, and they're like, this I can't deal with. And obviously the communication and the love was already broken. And so that's when they say, okay, I'm not going to stick around for this too.
It's another reason to keep cleaning house as you go, right? To not let those things go unspoken and the resentments build. And the breaking point is just around the corner. Oh, and all it takes is something like a crisis or a health struggle.
Yes. And that's why I think, for me, I always am a huge advocate for psychotherapy. And actually, some of my colleagues that are my friends, they're divorce attorneys, we get together and they say, you send everyone to therapy. Why do you do that? And I'm like, because it's so vitally important that the person understand themselves and what they caused, how they caused the demise of their marriage. And because they, and I always say, don't go for the other person, because they're like, I don't want to go. I don't want to be. I'm like, you're missing the point. The point is to figure out what you did wrong. And they go, and so they don't want to say they didn't do anything wrong because they know I'm their divorce attorney. So they're like, okay. And I tell them, I go 3 sessions. Like, you don't have to go for the rest of your life. Go 3 sessions, 5 sessions. And believe me, Liz, they come back and they thank me. They're like, if I got nothing else from the divorce, at least I figured out things about myself that I didn't know. Because here's the reality. Second marriages, there's a higher percentage of divorce, and third marriages, it's like 75% by the time you're your third marriage. So who are these people that are getting divorced more often, right? It's these people that don't know themselves, and they're just I see them in court, right? They bring their significant other in court, and I'm like, who is this person? And they tell me, oh, I'm starting to date, and I'm like, you're not divorced yet, and we're in divorce court. And so I tell them, Liz, I say, they have to sit outside. They have to sit in the hallway, because I don't want the judge to see this person, because the judge is immediately going to know, right? They come to the bench and they're like, okay, is this like a client? Who is this person?
It doesn't bode well then, right? It doesn't look well on them to have have a partner over in the wing.
It doesn't.
We'll be right back after this brief message. And we're back. Well, let's dive right in.
Yeah, something I often say to my clients is, wherever I go, there I am. So I could leave this relationship right here, and I could go over and start another one over here. But eventually I'm going to hear the same darn complaints from this person that I heard from this person over here. Because I take myself, right? And me, myself, and I, it's Liz. I'm going to hear the same complaints So I really respect your advice of someone hopping into individual therapy to understand the part they played in the demise. You're so wise.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, it's, the 22 years of experience and the psychology background and every case that our firm takes on. I do a lot of vetting with my clients before, potential clients before I take them on, because I want to make sure that they're not the high conflict one. So we represent a lot of, like, I would say, the underdogs or the innocent spouses. And so in like narcissistic relationships or high conflict marriages. So it's really important too that my client know that they had a part in this, even though they weren't the abusive one per se. And so I feel like we could talk about this forever, you and I, as we're on the same mind.
I love that you have a podcast, NARC, on narcissism. Sometime we'll have to revisit that. But I am curious about that. I often hear a lot of women say that I'm pretty sure my husband's a narcissist. And then the men are saying, I'm pretty sure my wife is borderline. We hear those attacks, right? Name calling or diagnosing. Do you see that people misuse those terms? Someone is called a narcissist, and not really, though, does that ever pan out that they're really truly a narcissist?
Yeah, I mean, it's
overused.
Sort of
Would you say sometimes?
Oh yeah, it's definitely overused. With that being said, obviously I have a podcast called the Narcissist Abuse Recovery Channel. But what I say to clients is maybe they have narcissistic traits, right? Like they have traits. And so we do not diagnose anyone. Obviously, as attorneys, we don't go to court and ever use the word narcissism or gaslighting or projecting or any of that, because the judge would look at us like we were sort of out of our mind, and they'd be like, counsel, do you have a degree in,
or just out of your lane, maybe?
Right, out of our lane. And so what we do is we would get expert opinions. We would get experts, to come in and say, this person, maybe needs a psych evaluation. Very rarely though, Liz, like in my 22 years of practice, that's happened a handful of times, right? Usually it's just they see the traits, they read about it on Instagram and hear about it on TikTok, and they're like, oh my gosh, yes, I can identify with these traits. But to be a full-blown narcissist is you have to have, I think there's like 12 or 15 different traits. And so, and you have to have every single one. So we say, we're not going to diagnose your spouse. And I always tell them, don't go searching out for this stuff. Like, you're getting divorced. What do you care if the person's a narcissist or, bipolar? You're divorcing them, right? Oh yeah, I'm divorcing them. Okay. So let's talk about the strategy of the case and how we need to document maybe a little bit more closely to show some of these signs or traits when it comes to your child. If they don't have a child in common and they don't have to co-parent, then it doesn't matter what they are, because you can just split the assets and the debts, and then in California it's no fault, and it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant what they are. Just work on it.
Is your podcast recovery channel, pardon me, is that for people who have been involved with narcissists, or is it someone who's, I think I answered my own question. It's probably not someone who's a recovering narcissist, or is it?
No. So it's really for our clients sometimes that, are in high conflict marriages and now in the middle of a divorce, and then obviously after, because there's post-traumatic stress, obviously. And so it's for that sort of bucket of people. And then just also the community, because, you could have a narcissistic neighbor or coworker or boss or mother-in-law, and so it's really to help the community, and we don't monetize it. So it's just strictly for community purposes, for people to learn, like, these people exist. and you need to stay clear away from them because they will take you down.
Mm-hmm. Well, good for you to tackle that. That on kind of on a side note, right? In addition to being an attorney, that's pretty cool. It's kind of another side specialty, just a little bit of helping people navigate that very difficult personality.
Yes. Yes.
In your mediation work, are you also a mediator? Do you do mediating with couples?
Yes. And actually, mediation is, it's one of my favorite things at the firm is to do mediation. And I don't know if you've ever heard of collaborative law.
Of course, I love it. Yes.
So I remember, Liz, 22 years ago when I first started, collaborative law was sort of a new thing. I remember it was like, okay, are you going to be a litigator or you're going to be a collaborative law attorney? And they wanted you to have like these defining, like draw the line in the sand. And it was like, well, I was a new attorney. So I was like, I'm going to take the litigated cases, but I also did some study on the collaborative law, and I loved that model. And we don't get too many collaborative cases at the firm just because we do high conflict. And as you know, those are sign of at odds, those two a little bit, right? But mediation can, I think, work for anybody that doesn't have the mental illness like narcissism, that is not like physically abusive, because that doesn't work with those types of people. But yeah, we have a handful of mediated cases every year, and it's my favorite work. And when I said that I've seen people get back together, it's usually in the mediated cases.
Interesting.
Yes. And I'll actually tell them, I'll say, like I had a client last year, and I'll say, did you, like I pulled the woman aside and said, are you sure about, you want to divorce him? And she said, why? And first of all, they had a 6-month-old. And I said, I don't see him as a bad, we were giving him all these like parenting classes to take. And literally, Liz, he was like, yeah, I found this other one too. And he was like voluntarily wanting to take the parent because he had, a newborn. And so she said, let me give this some thought. She said, can I put it on hold for 30 days? I said, you both can. Yeah, absolutely. She got back with him. And so that's sort of where it happens in mediation where, I'm like, look, I'm a divorce attorney. I'm telling you, there's been no physical injury. There's been no domestic violence. And you guys and so they said that, yes, they were going to go to therapy together. And she was like, I'm so happy you said the parenting classes because she was a little bit of a control freak and he wasn't doing it the way she wanted. And so she's like, he's coming around. So I think it's important, right, to have those discussions with people. And that's why I love mediation. I think that they'll be very successful in their marriage.
That is wonderful. Gosh, that's just got to be thrilling. I know it is thrilling when I see that happening in my own practice. Is there anything else, Padideh, that maybe I haven't asked that you're hoping we would share with our listeners and viewers about how to maybe stay away from divorce attorneys, right? How to really work on the marriage, things to be aware of in the small cracks that can lead to the big breakups.
Yeah, I mean, I think, when there was a stigma with therapy 22 years ago when I started my practice. And now I think with the new generation of millennials, they're realizing that they can reach out for help. And what I always say is it's actually a strength, not a weakness. So anytime you're asking for help, it means that you're actually trying. It's when you don't ask for help or that, let's say you go out on the marriage, right? You have an affair. That's where you're not trying, right? But when you want the marriage to work, it's okay to ask for help and to go see a psychotherapist and to, understand what your part is in it if you want to keep the marriage. Of course, I don't have any judgment. I'm very pro mental health. And I think with the millennial generation, because they've seen their parents get divorced I think they're waiting to get married longer, but I think they're realizing, mental health is just like physical health. Like if you need to go to see a doctor and you have, a flu, you can't do anything yourself. You go to a doctor. Mental health is the same, and there should be zero stigma attached to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're so right. You're so right. Good for you. Well, we appreciate all the good work you're doing to help couples, help them if divorce really is a necessity, or to help them rethink that as well. You have all kinds of resources. Where can listeners find out more about you and what you offer, Attorney Jafari?
So obviously our website is jafarilegal.com. And then we have, I'm big on social media. I remember about 2 years ago, I was like, okay, we're going to have to get a social media team because I don't understand this Instagram and TikTok and all this stuff. And they keep telling us they want to undo TikTok, but they keep saying that they're delaying that. So Jafari Legal for everything. And then, YouTube. And I don't know if you know about Threads. This is a new thing. It's like Threads. It's like the old Twitter. So I'm actually on Threads myself. It's like the only social media that I post my own thoughts.
Nice. So I remember Twitter, tweets, tweeted. I remember just feeling so confused about that. So it's good to know that Threads is replacing that a little bit, it sounds like.
Yes.
Yep.
And then obviously the podcast is the Narcissist Abuse Recovery channel on Great. Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So we're really excited, my co-host and I, about the podcast to help the community.
That has got to be popular. I can only imagine. I will check it out. This is the time in our interview, Padideh, where we like to ask each of our guests this particular question in honor of our name of our podcast and all of your personal and even professional experience. What do you believe is a key to a stronger marriage connection?
Communication.
Okay.
Communication is got to be number one.
That can be fraught with all kinds of problems, right? Sometimes I communicate something to my husband. I think, I think I wish I had left that unsaid. So what about communication would you say is so key? What kind of communication would you say is crucial?
Well, communicating your wishes, your needs, asking for help. I know sometimes as alpha females, and I didn't mean us, but you know what I mean. We are doers. And so just knowing that we need to pause and ask for help, and communicating that as a team, just like, if you think about, how, my husband makes me watch a lot of sports, how people communicate as a team, right, for an intended goal. And so you need to do that with your spouse. And they're not against you. They're for you. They're a part of your team. And a lot of, I feel people don't treat them that way. They do in the beginning, but then they stop that trusting, right? So I think communication is number one. And if you don't know how to communicate, that's where therapy comes in, because they will teach you. They'll give you books also. Read this book. Both of you read this book. How are you interpreting it? Are you understanding what they're saying? So it's very important.
Love that. Communication. Very good. From all the things we've discussed today, do you have a takeaway, my friend, that you want all of us to remember most? What would you say is the most key things? And you've shared so much. It's hard to probably choose one, but if you had to, what would it be?
I would say, and this is weird coming from a divorce attorney, but I would say that before you decide to file for a divorce, do everything humanly possible in order to see if you can make the marriage work. Obviously, if there are, domestic violence, that's something that, cannot easily be worked out. But if there's communication problems, if there's resentments, if there are, different expectations now, because remember, people grow, right? Every year somebody is growing, and you want to be growing together and not growing apart. And so I think it's important, and I've seen this a lot, Liz, in my practice over 22 years, where couples will come, they'll file for the divorce, and it's like they get back together, then they come back again and refile. And what it does is it clogs up the already very clogged court system in Los Angeles and Orange County, where we practice law. And there's people that really need the court system for like domestic violence cases, which are also heard in divorce court. So it's like, just make sure, because once you file, it's sort of like, yes, you can undo it, but there's a lot of allegations that are made and declarations and things like that. So you want to make sure, are you really prepared to go the distance? And don't use it sort of, I've seen people do this as a threat or a sword. Like, oh, I'll just file for divorce, and then they do it and they're like, oh, well, and it's like, okay, but these are not people these should have been reconciled, right? They should have not filed for divorce. They should have seen people like yourself. And so, and don't forget, we haven't talked about children. That really damage a child too. Like knowing, oh, my parents filed for divorce, now they're back. And it's very confusing for a child.
And oh gosh, so many layers, right? I often say that in therapy too, is my takeaway being very similar to yours, is let's turn over every stone. Let's make sure that we have looked at this left, right, upside down, backwards, inside out, to know that without a doubt, there is no other way than divorce. I don't want people to leave or 5 years down the road say, gosh, looking back, what if I'd found a better therapist? What if I tried harder? I want us to turn over every stumbling stone.
You know, they say that, I think there's a statistic out there that say a lot of men say that. A lot of men, sometimes when there's cheating, and this is not to say that only men cheat, because we know that's not true. It's 50-50 now. But I've heard that said, like, when they get older, they're like, I should have stayed with my first wife. I should have tried harder for my kids. And yes, a lot of regret. So this goes along with what we're saying, is make sure you've turned every stone and you've read the books and you've gone to therapy and you're really making sure, because there was a reason you committed to this person, right?
That's right. Really take a long look in the mirror. I think any of us should be doing that day in and day out, right? Rather, no matter where we are in our marriage trajectory or happiness level, is it me? Is it me, right? This discord with my husband right now, is it me? I think if we're constantly doing that, I think we can really do well long-term in marriage.
Yes.
Attorney Jafari, I wish we lived closer. It'd be so fun to go to lunch. Thank you for joining us. And we will, friends, see you next time. And please check out Attorney Jafari's resources. Do remember, friends, it's the small things that create a stronger marriage connection. And we'll see you next time with Dave. Bye-bye now.
Thanks for joining us today. Hey, do us a favor and take a second to subscribe to our podcast and the Utah Marriage Commission YouTube channel at Utah Marriage Commission, where you can watch this and every episode of the show. Be sure to smash the like button, leave a comment, and share this episode with a friend. You can also follow and interact with us on Instagram at Stronger Marriage Live and Facebook at Stronger Marriage. So be sure to share with us which topics you loved or which guests we should have on the show next. If you want even more resources to improve your marriage or relationship connection, visit strongermarriage.org, where you'll find free workshops, e-courses, in-depth webinars, relationship surveys, and more. Each episode of Stronger Marriage Connection is hosted and sponsored by the Utah Marriage Commission at Utah State University. And finally, a big thanks to our producer, Rex Polanis, and the team at Utah State University, and you, our audience. You make this show possible. The opinions, findings, conclusions, and recommendations expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the views of the Utah Marriage Commission.